In the hushed whispers of a moonlit night, when shadows stretch long and dark, a chilling presence stirs. The stories we tell around flickering campfires or read in the dim glow of our bedside lamps often carry an unsettling truth. They speak of beings that dwell in the twilight between life and death, creatures whose gaze sends shivers down our spines. These beings, with their eyes like burning embers and their hunger that knows no end, are what we call vampires. But what if I told you that these chilling tales are more than just frightful fantasies? They are echoes from ancient times, resonating through the corridors of history, weaving their way into our very souls. Vampires, as we know them today, are often portrayed as seductive and sinister figures, roaming the night in search of the living. But the core idea of a vampire, a being that preys upon the living, draining their vitality, has roots that stretch far back into the past. The definition of a vampire is not just about fangs and blood, it's about the deep-seated fear of what lies beyond the grave. In essence, a vampire is a creature caught in a perpetual limbo, existing beyond the realm of the living yet not fully embraced by death. Travel back thousands of years, and you'll find that our ancestors also harbored this fear. Their vampires were not always the glamorous figures of modern fiction, but rather dark, disturbing entities that represented the unknown and the unknowable. These ancient myths were born out of a profound need to explain the unexplainable, illnesses, sudden deaths, and the inexplicable suffering that plagued their lives. In ancient Mesopotamia, for instance, there were terrifying beings like the Lamashtu. This demoness was feared for her malevolent nature, believed to prey on pregnant women and newborns, a creature whose very existence was a manifestation of humanity's deepest fears. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, the Aku were restless spirits that could cause harm to the living. They were not vampires in the sense we might think of today, but their predatory nature linked them to the vampire myths that would evolve over the centuries. In the heart of ancient Greece, tales of the Lamia, a beautiful woman turned into a monster by Zeus's wrath, stirred the imagination. Her transformation into a being that devoured children painted a vivid picture of a predator lurking in the dark. The Greeks also spoke of the Empusa, a phantom-like creature that seduced and drained the life from unsuspecting victims. These myths served as cautionary tales, warning of the dangers that lurk beyond the safety of the hearth. The Romans, too, had their share of dark legends. They inherited and adapted many of the Greek stories, incorporating their own fears and superstitions. In Roman times, tales of creatures that drained life and vitality became a part of their folklore, influencing how vampire myths would develop in the centuries that followed. Travel eastward, and the stories of vampires become even more fascinating. In Hindu mythology, the Vedala and Pisacha were spirits that roamed graveyards, feeding on the blood of the living. These entities were not merely figments of imagination, but were deeply intertwined with cultural practices and beliefs about death and the afterlife. The Chinese also had their own vampire-like creatures. The Huli Jing, a fox spirit with the power to seduce and drain life, and the Jiangshi, a reanimated corpse that preyed on the living, reveal how different cultures grappled with similar fears through their unique lenses. These beings were manifestations of cultural anxieties about death and the supernatural. In Japan, ancient legends spoke of creatures like the Rokurokubi, who could stretch their necks to great lengths, and the Joragumo, a spider demon with a penchant for deceit and blood. These myths were not merely stories to frighten children, they were deeply ingrained in the culture's understanding of the supernatural. Even in distant lands, such as Korea, stories of the Cheonggyeguishin, a vengeful spirit of a young woman who died before her time, carry elements of vampiric traits, highlighting the universal nature of these fears. Across the ocean, Native American traditions tell of the wendigo, a malevolent spirit associated with cannibalism and insatiable hunger. Its connection to vampiric traits speaks to the shared anxieties about insatiable beings lurking in the wilderness. In Africa, vampiric figures like the Asambasam and the Ads demonstrate how these fears have transcended cultures, each putting their own spin on the concept of predatory spirits. These creatures were feared and respected, their stories serving as warnings against the unknown and the otherworldly. South American myths, too, hold their own dark entities. The Chupacabra, with its thirst for blood and its fearsome reputation, reflects how similar themes have surfaced in diverse cultures, each shaping the vampire myth in their own way. The chilling tales of the past serve as a haunting reminder that the vampire is not just a figment of imagination but a powerful symbol of humanity's fears and the unknown. As we look back at these ancient myths, we see that our ancestors' stories were more than just ghost stories. They were reflections of their deepest anxieties, fears, and the mysteries of existence that continue to captivate our imaginations today. In the darkest hours of night, when the world is shrouded in silence, a figure stirs from the shadows, cloaked in an aura of dread. This figure, known across cultures and centuries, is the vampire, a being that straddles the line between life and death. The vampire archetype is more than just a creature of myth, it is a profound symbol of our deepest fears and desires. At its core, the vampire is characterized by an insatiable hunger and a predatory nature. These beings are often depicted with sharp fangs, a thirst for blood, and an unyielding need to feed on the vitality of the living. This hunger is not merely for sustenance, but for life itself. The vampire embodies the fear of death and the yearning for eternal life, a symbol of what lies beyond the grave. One of the most striking features of the vampire is its ability to blend into the human world, appearing as a normal person by day. This duality, the outward appearance of normalcy masking a dark and dangerous reality, creates an unsettling sense of paranoia. The vampire's charm and allure make them even more frightening, as they are not monstrous in every aspect, but can be both beautiful and deadly. This duplicity echoes a deep-seated fear that danger can be hidden behind the most ordinary of facades. Across different cultures, certain themes echo in the portrayal of vampires. The idea of a predatory being that drains the life force of others is nearly universal. In ancient Greece, the Lamia and Impusa preyed upon the young and innocent, their victims' blood sustaining their cursed existence. In Slavic folklore, the Strigoi and Nosferatu were believed to rise from their graves to feed on the blood of the living. Similarly, the Huli Jing in China and the Jiangshi in China and Korea were feared for their ability to steal life through their vampiric acts. Despite these variations, the common threads are striking. Vampires are often tied to death and the afterlife, embodying the fear of the unknown. They represent the boundaries between life and death, serving as reminders of our mortality. The act of drinking blood is not just a physical act, but a symbolic one, an attempt to conquer death and defy the natural order. This craving for immortality reflects humanity's own struggles with the inevitability of death and the desire to overcome it. The evolution of vampire mythology reveals how these fears have been adapted and transformed over time. In medieval Europe, the vampire became associated with disease and decay. The Black Death and other plagues led to the belief that the dead were rising to spread illness. People would dig up graves and find bodies that had not decayed properly, leading to the belief that these were vampires. This era saw the rise of gruesome practices, such as staking corpses and burning them, in an attempt to prevent the dead from rising. As time went on, vampire myths began to shift with the changing attitudes and cultural norms. The Romantic era of the 19th century introduced the vampire as a more sympathetic and complex figure. In literature, vampires became tragic heroes, their immortality a curse rather than a blessing. This shift reflected a growing fascination with the dark and the Gothic, exploring themes of love, loneliness, and the struggle for identity. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the vampire has undergone yet another transformation. Modern media has depicted vampires as both villains and heroes, blending traditional fears with contemporary issues. From the seductive and enigmatic figures in vampire novels to the brooding anti-heroes of film and television, the vampire archetype has become a mirror for our current fears and fantasies. The vampire now embodies a broader range of human emotions and struggles, reflecting our ongoing anxieties about mortality, power, and desire. The vampire archetype, with its deep-rooted symbolism and adaptability, reveals much about our collective psyche. It speaks to our fears of death, our desires for immortality, and the darkness that lurks within us all. As these myths continue to evolve, they remain a powerful testament to our enduring fascination with the mysteries of life and death. In the ancient land of Mesopotamia, where the first great civilizations flourished between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the night was not a time of rest, but a realm filled with dark, lurking fears. In the twilight of these early cities, stories of fearsome beings circulated, their whispers casting a pall over the lives of the people who lived in constant anticipation of the unknown. Among these nightmarish figures was Lamashtu, a demoness whose legend would cast a long shadow over the future of vampire myths. Lamashtu was more than just a figure of fear, she was the embodiment of terror itself. Described in ancient texts as a monstrous being with the body of a woman and the features of a demon, claws, fangs, and a hunger that knew no bounds, Lamashtu was believed to haunt pregnant women and newborns. The mere mention of her name would send shivers down the spines of those who feared her nightly visits. She was said to invade the homes of the vulnerable, preying upon the unborn and the weak, her cruel intent reflected in her insatiable thirst for their blood. The terror associated with Lamashtu was not merely about her physical appearance, but the fear she inspired. Her presence was linked with sudden infant deaths and miscarriages, events that were difficult to explain and even harder to bear. Her story was a way to give shape to the inexplicable suffering of the time. People believed that she was a vengeful spirit, a force of nature that defied the order of life and death, a being that thrived on the suffering of the innocent. Lamashtu's influence did not stop with Mesopotamian lore. Her legend echoed through the centuries, weaving its way into the tapestry of vampire myths that would follow. The idea of a female demon who preys on the vulnerable laid the groundwork for later vampire tales where similar themes of predation and fear appear. In ancient cultures across the globe, the traits associated with Lamashtu can be seen mirrored in the vampire figures that would come to haunt folklore. For example, the concept of a vampiric being with a predatory nature and a particular focus on the young or weak finds a disturbing reflection in many later myths. The Lamia of Greek mythology, with her similar penchant for targeting children, shares a chilling resemblance to Lamashtu. The Lamia's transformation from a once beautiful woman into a monster with a ravenous hunger for young blood echoes the way Lamashtu's monstrous form was tied to her fearsome activities. In Eastern European folklore, the Strigoi and Nosferatu, with their unholy hunger and undead existence, also reflect aspects of Lamashtu's legend. These vampires, too, preyed upon the living, often focusing on the sick or the young, mirroring the terrifying characteristics of Lamashtu and her ilk. The notion of a being that defies natural laws, existing between life and death, is a theme that extends from Lamashtu's story into the vampire legends that span different cultures and eras. Even in the more modern interpretations of vampire lore, the legacy of Lamashtu can be felt. The archetype of the vampire, one who preys on the vulnerable and represents a fear of death and disease, finds its roots in these ancient fears. As vampire myths evolved, they absorbed and transformed the core ideas present in early Mesopotamian legends, adapting them to new contexts but retaining the primal fears that drove their creation. In the dim, flickering light of ancient Mesopotamian households, where shadows danced on the walls and the night was filled with dread, Lamashtu's legend was more than just a story. It was a manifestation of the anxieties and terrors of a people who faced the unknown with a mixture of fear and superstition. Her story was a reflection of their struggles with mortality and the inexplicable forces that seemed to control their fates. And as her legend traveled through time and across cultures, it left an indelible mark on the myths of vampires, shaping the fears and imaginations of countless generations to come. In the flickering shadows of ancient Egypt, where the sun dipped below the horizon and the Nile whispered ancient secrets, a different kind of fear haunted the living. It was not the fear of the known but of the unknown, an unsettling dread of what happened after death. The concept of the Aku, the restless spirits of the deceased, embodied this fear, and their presence carried a dark, unsettling influence that would seep into later vampire myths. The Aku were not your typical ghosts, they were the souls of the dead who had not found peace. These spirits were believed to roam the earth, their presence a source of great anxiety. Unlike the peaceful souls who joined the gods in the afterlife, the Aku were restless, their unfinished business binding them to the mortal world. They were often depicted as shadowy figures, their forms barely visible but their intentions unmistakably malevolent. In the darkness of ancient Egyptian homes, where families would whisper prayers and leave offerings to appease the dead, the fear of the Aku was palpable. These spirits were known to cause illness and misfortune, their presence a stark reminder of the thin veil between life and death. The Aku were said to have the power to drain life from the living, their touch a slow, creeping death. This vampiric trait, sapping the vitality of the living, echoes the most haunting aspects of later vampire legends. The stories of the Aku reveal much about how the ancient Egyptians viewed death and the supernatural. The fear of these restless spirits was not just about their ghostly appearances, but about the very essence of their existence. They were beings that defied natural order, representing a fear of the unknown and a sense of helplessness against the forces that lay beyond the grave. Their vampiric nature, draining the life force from the living, mirrored the themes that would become central to vampire lore in other cultures. The influence of Egyptian mythology on later vampire myths is subtle yet profound. The concept of the Aku as malevolent, life-draining spirits laid the groundwork for the archetype of the vampire. As vampire legends spread across cultures and epics, they often retained elements of this ancient fear. The idea of a spirit or creature that preys upon the living, draining their energy or blood, became a common thread in many vampire myths that followed. In the Greek and Roman worlds, for instance, the notion of spirits that could cause harm or feed on the living took on new forms. Figures like the Lamia and Impusa in Greek mythology, and later the Nosferatu in Eastern European folklore, reflected the same anxieties about restless spirits and life-draining entities. The Egyptian Aku, with their vampiric traits, echoed through these myths, shaping the way later cultures understood and feared their own versions of undead beings. Even as vampire lore evolved, the legacy of the Aku lingered in the shadows. The portrayal of vampires as beings that exist on the fringes of life and death, draining vitality from the living, can be traced back to these ancient Egyptian beliefs. The Aku's ability to cause illness and suffering through their presence influenced how later myths depicted vampires, adding layers of fear and darkness to their already unsettling nature. The ancient Egyptians' fear of the Aku was not just about the supernatural, but about the profound uncertainties of existence. Their beliefs reflected a deep-seated anxiety about what lies beyond death, a fear that the living might be vulnerable to the spirits of those who had not found peace. This fear is a thread that weaves through vampire mythology, from the restless spirits of ancient Egypt to the modern-day portrayals of vampires as eternal predators. As the sun set over the ancient lands of Egypt, the Aku lingered in the shadows, their presence a reminder of the delicate balance between life and death. The fear they inspired, of spirits that could drain life and cause suffering, was a reflection of the deepest anxieties of their time. This ancient fear, embodied by the Aku, would echo through the ages, shaping the stories and legends of vampires in ways that continue to haunt and captivate our imaginations today. In the moonlit hills of ancient Greece, where shadows danced beneath the olive trees and the stars seemed to whisper ancient tales, there lurked dark and terrifying figures whose legends would send shivers down the spines of those who heard their stories. Among these fearful entities were the Lamia and Impusa, creatures whose legends would play a pivotal role in shaping the vampire myths that would follow. The Lamia was not simply a figure of fear, she was a symbol of nightmare and dread. Once a beautiful queen, Lamia was transformed into a monstrous being by the gods, driven mad with grief and rage. Her transformation was a punishment, but it became a curse that would echo through time. In her new form, she was said to roam the night, a horrific shadow of her former self. Her eyes, once filled with royal grace, were now said to glow with a chilling hunger. She preyed upon children, her bite stealing their lives and leaving their bodies drained and lifeless. The terror of the Lamia lay not just in her predatory nature but in the sorrow and madness that drove her actions. She became a figure of dark enchantment, her beauty a mask for the horrifying truth that lay beneath. To the people of ancient Greece, she was both a cautionary tale and a haunting presence, embodying their fears of the supernatural and the loss of innocence. Her legend tapped into the primal fear of a predator lurking in the shadows, ready to strike when least expected. Alongside the Lamia, there was Impusa, another fearsome creature that wandered through Greek mythology. Impusa was a shape-shifting demon, often described as having one leg of bronze and one of a donkey. She was known for her ability to seduce and lure her victims into her grasp, only to drain their life force once they were vulnerable. Her method of attack was not just physical but psychological, preying on the fears and desires of her victims before ultimately consuming them. Empusa's shape-shifting ability made her particularly terrifying. She could appear as a beautiful woman to lure her victims, but once they were in her power, her true form was revealed, an abomination of twisted limbs and hunger. This duality of appearance, charming and deadly, echoed the fears of encountering something that was not what it seemed, a theme that would resonate deeply in later vampire legends. The Lamia and Empusa were more than just mythological monsters, they were archetypes that would influence the way later cultures viewed vampires. Their stories provided a template for the vampire as a creature of predation and deception, combining beauty with horror and feeding on the life of the innocent. The Lamia's predatory nature and Empusa's shape-shifting abilities became essential elements in the vampire mythos that would evolve over centuries. In the vast tapestry of Greek mythology, these figures played a crucial role in shaping the understanding of vampiric creatures. They reflected a deep-seated fear of beings that existed on the fringes of life and death, creatures that could blend into the human world while hiding their true, monstrous nature. This fear of the hidden, of entities that could strike from the shadows, became a cornerstone of vampire lore in cultures that followed. As these ancient Greek stories spread across the Mediterranean and beyond, they carried with them the elements of fear and fascination that would influence vampire myths in later cultures. The Lamia and Empusa, with their dark allure and predatory instincts, set the stage for the development of vampire legends that would echo through time. Their influence is seen in the way later myths portrayed vampires as both enchanting and horrifying, beautiful yet deadly, a reflection of the ancient Greeks' own anxieties about the unknown and the supernatural. In the quiet corners of ancient Greek households, where tales of these monsters were passed down through generations, the fear of the Lamia and Empusa lived on. Their stories were more than mere legends, they were a reflection of the profound fears that lurked in the human psyche, fears that continue to haunt and fascinate us today. The shadows cast by these ancient figures would stretch across time, shaping the way we understand and fear the creatures of the night. In the ancient cities of Rome, where the grandeur of the empire mingled with the whispers of old fears, the night held its own dark secrets. As the moon cast its pale light over the forum and the bustling streets fell silent, a sense of dread lingered in the air, shaped by tales of creatures that prowled in the darkness. Among these unsettling figures were the vampires of Roman myth, beings whose stories would cast a long shadow over European folklore. The Romans, inheriting and adapting the myths of their Greek predecessors, gave shape to their own vampiric entities. One of the most terrifying figures in Roman mythology was the Strix. Described as a bird-like creature with a horrific appetite for blood, the Strix was said to invade homes at night, its chilling screech announcing its presence. The Strix was not merely a monster but a symbol of deep-seated fears, an embodiment of the threat that lurked in the dark, waiting to prey on the innocent. In Roman belief, the Strix was more than a figure of folklore, it was a manifestation of the anxieties that plagued the Roman world. Stories circulated of these creatures swooping down to attack infants and pregnant women, their bloodlust a terrifying reminder of the fragility of life. The fear of the Strix reflected a broader concern about the dangers that could strike from the shadows, a fear that would shape the vampire myths that followed. Another significant figure in Roman mythology was the Lamia. Though she originated in Greek legend, the Romans adopted and adapted her story. The Lamia became a symbol of seductive danger, her beauty masking a deadly nature. This transformation into a vampire-like figure who preyed upon children and the vulnerable added layers of horror and allure to the existing myth. The Roman Lamia, with her blend of attractiveness and terror, became a powerful archetype, influencing how vampires would be depicted in later European folklore. The Romans also believed in the concept of the vampires, or lemurs, restless spirits of the dead who returned to haunt the living. These spirits were feared for their ability to cause harm, illness, and misfortune. The lemurs were not just ghosts but entities with a malevolent presence, their existence a chilling reminder of the thin boundary between life and death. They were often associated with rituals and ceremonies meant to appease or ward off these restless souls, reflecting the deep-seated fears of supernatural retribution. The influence of Roman beliefs on European vampire folklore is profound. The figures from Roman mythology, like the Strix and the Lamia, carried forward the themes of predatory creatures and restless spirits, shaping the vampire legends that would emerge in medieval Europe. The Strix's bloodthirsty nature and the Lamia's seductive danger became archetypes that would be adapted and expanded upon in later cultures. As the Roman Empire spread across Europe, it brought with it these terrifying myths, which mingled with local beliefs and superstitions. The vampire figures of Roman lore laid the groundwork for the evolution of vampire myths in medieval Europe. The concept of a creature that could drain life and cause harm, whether through blood or supernatural means, was deeply embedded in the collective consciousness. In medieval Europe, the fear of vampires became more pronounced, influenced by Roman tales and combined with local legends and superstitions. The Roman Strix and Lamia found new forms in the vampire legends of Eastern Europe, where creatures like the Nosferatu and the Strigoi emerged. These new vampires retained the core elements of their Roman predecessors: the ability to prey upon the living, the fear of their predatory nature, and the chilling presence of beings that defied natural order. The legacy of Roman vampire figures can be seen in the way later myths portrayed vampires as both alluring and horrifying, a blend of beauty and terror that reflects the ancient fears of the Romans. The Strix's screech and the Lamia's seductive danger became integral parts of the vampire mythology, influencing how these creatures would be imagined and feared throughout history. In the quiet moments of the night, as the echoes of ancient Roman myths lingered in the shadows, the fears of the past lived on. The vampires of Roman myth, the Strix, the Lamia, and the Lemurs, shaped the stories and legends that would haunt European folklore for centuries. Their presence was a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness, a legacy that continues to captivate and terrify our imaginations today. In the dim corridors of ancient Hindu mythology, where shadows twist and turn, the Vedala and Pisacha emerge as unsettling figures that capture the essence of terror. Their presence in these ancient stories speaks to a universal fear of the undead and the malevolent entities that defy the natural order. The Vedala, often depicted as a ghostly spirit or a ghoul, roams the graveyards and cemeteries, drawn to the realm of the dead. This being is more than just a restless spirit, it is a creature of dark magic and malevolent intent. Legends describe the Vedala as a being with a rotting corpse, whose mere touch can drain the life from the living. It is said that the Vedala could possess and control the dead, using them to carry out its sinister will. The fear surrounding the Vedala is rooted in its ability to disrupt the natural balance between life and death. The Vedala's existence is a constant reminder of the thin veil separating the living from the dead. It is a creature that defies this boundary, bringing with it the chilling possibility that death is not an end but a transition into something far more terrifying. This fear of an afterlife that is not peaceful but fraught with danger resonates deeply, making the Vedala a figure of profound dread. In Hindu mythology, another fearsome entity is the Pisacha, a spirit known for its terrifying and malevolent nature. The Pisacha is described as a ghastly being that preys upon humans, feeding on their blood and flesh. Unlike the Vedala, which is often associated with the dead and graveyards, the Pisacha is more active, roaming the forests and desolate places in search of prey. The Pisacha's hunger is insatiable, its need for sustenance driven by a dark, unquenchable thirst. The Pisacha is a creature of pure fear, embodying the terror of being hunted and consumed by an entity that defies human understanding. It represents the darkest aspects of human anxiety, the fear of being at the mercy of a predatory force that is both invisible and relentless. The Pisacha's attacks are often brutal and horrific, adding to its reputation as a creature of nightmares. When comparing these Hindu figures to vampires in other cultures, striking similarities and differences emerge. Like the Vedala and Pisacha, many vampire myths feature beings that drain the life force of the living. The Vedala's ability to possess and control the dead has parallels in the vampire legends of ancient Greece and Rome, where entities like the Strix and Lamia also preyed on the living in grotesque ways. The Pisacha's predatory nature echoes the bloodthirsty traits of the vampire archetypes seen in later European folklore, where vampires are known for their relentless hunt for blood. Yet, the Hindu depiction of these entities also introduces unique elements. For example, the Vitalis connection to graveyards and its role in disturbing the dead reflect a more complex view of death and the afterlife. In contrast, European vampires often have a more straightforward predatory role, focused primarily on their need for blood. Similarly, the Pisach's insatiable hunger and its eerie presence in desolate places highlight a different kind of fear, one that combines the terror of being hunted with the dread of encountering something that defies natural laws. The Vedala and Pisacha provide a window into how different cultures grapple with similar fears. They show that the fear of the undead and predatory spirits is not confined to one part of the world, but is a universal aspect of human anxiety. Whether through the ghostly Vedala or the bloodthirsty Pisacha, these myths address the deep-seated fear of creatures that defy the natural order, reflecting a shared concern about what lies beyond the veil of life and death. As the stories of the Vedala and Pisacha echo through the ages, they remind us of the dark corners of the human psyche where fear and fascination with the undead reside. Their tales capture the essence of what it means to confront the unknown, to face entities that challenge our understanding of life and death. The haunting presence of these figures in Hindu mythology underscores a universal fear of the supernatural, a fear that transcends cultures and eras, resonating with a timeless sense of dread. In the vast and ancient lands of China, where the whisper of bamboo leaves and the flickering glow of lanterns create a haunting atmosphere, two figures of darkness have long haunted the imagination. These figures, the Huli Jing and the Jiangshi, represent a deep-seated fear of the undead that echoes through Chinese mythology, revealing the profound anxieties and cultural significance surrounding these eerie beings. The Huli Jing, or fox spirit, is a creature that blurs the lines between beauty and horror. With the ability to transform into a stunning woman, the Huli Jing often lures unsuspecting victims with her enchanting allure. She is not just a predator but a symbol of deceptive danger. Her transformation is a weapon, her seductive appearance a trap. Once her prey is ensnared, the Huli Jing reveals her true, monstrous form, her fox-like features and malevolent nature coming to the fore. The terror of the Huli Jing lies in her ability to manipulate and deceive. She represents a fear of the unknown, of encountering something or someone that seems harmless or even attractive but hides a dark and dangerous reality. This fear is intensified by her power to drain life force from her victims, leaving them weakened and drained, a chilling reminder of the price of falling for superficial charm. The Huli Jing embodies the fear of being deceived and consumed by an entity that exists at the intersection of beauty and horror. In contrast, the Jiangshi, or hopping vampire, represents a different kind of dread. This undead creature is known for its distinctive, terrifying appearance, its stiff, rotting body moving with a jerky, hopping motion. The Jiangshi is not just a vampire, it is a corpse that rises from the grave with a relentless hunger for human blood. Its very presence is a source of fear, as it is both a physical manifestation of death and a terrifying predator. The Jiangshi's eerie, stiff movements and its grotesque appearance make it a figure of pure horror. Unlike the Huli Jing's deceptive charm, the Jiangshi is an unrelenting force of darkness. It preys upon the living with a terrifying persistence, its hunger driving it to drain blood and spread fear. The Jiangshi embodies the fear of death itself, a fear of the dead returning to haunt and harm the living. Its presence is a stark reminder of the thin line between life and death, and the horror of what happens when that line is crossed. The cultural significance of these creatures is profound. In Chinese mythology, the Huli Jing and Jiangshi are not merely figures of fear, but symbols of deeper anxieties about life, death, and the supernatural. The Huli Jing's ability to deceive and drain life force reflects fears about trust and betrayal, while the Jiangshi's relentless predation embodies the fear of death and the unknown. Historically, these myths served as cautionary tales, warnings about the dangers that lurk beyond the boundaries of the known world. They reflect the anxieties of a culture deeply concerned with the natural and supernatural forces that could disrupt the order of life. The stories of the Huli Jing and Jiangshi were passed down through generations, their terrifying qualities ensuring that their legends remained alive and potent. The Huli Jing and Jiangshi also reveal the ways in which Chinese culture grappled with concepts of life and death. The Huli Jing's connection to the spiritual and mystical aspects of life highlights a fear of entities that defy natural order, while the Jiangshir's portrayal as a reanimated corpse reflects anxieties about death and the afterlife. These myths illustrate how cultures confront their deepest fears through storytelling, creating figures that embody the darkest aspects of human experience. As these ancient tales of terror continue to captivate the imagination, they remind us of the universal fears that transcend time and place. The Huli Jing and Jiangshir are not just products of Chinese mythology but symbols of the human condition, fearful of the unknown, wary of deception, and haunted by the specter of death. Their stories continue to resonate, a chilling reflection of the anxieties that lie at the heart of human experience. In the quiet, shadowed corners of traditional Japanese folklore, two figures cast long and chilling shadows, the Rokurokubi and the Joragumo. Their stories, steeped in eerie mystery, reveal a dark and unsettling world where fear and fascination intertwine, and their legacy has profoundly shaped modern vampire myths. The Rokurokubi is a creature that embodies the terror of the uncanny. By day, it appears as an ordinary human, blending seamlessly into everyday life. But come nightfall, the Rokurokubi reveals its true nature. Its most horrifying trait is its ability to stretch its neck to alarming lengths, a grotesque transformation that allows it to spy on or even terrify those who cross its path. This unsettling ability to extend its neck like a nightmarish serpent is more than just a physical transformation, it represents a fear of the hidden dangers that lie beneath the surface of normalcy. The Rokurokubi's transformation from an ordinary person to a monstrous entity taps into a primal fear, the fear of the unknown, of something or someone appearing benign but hiding a horrifying reality. The horror lies not just in the stretching neck but in the violation of the natural order. The Rokurokubi is a reminder of the thin line between safety and danger, a creature that shifts from the mundane to the monstrous with chilling ease. The Joragumo, or Spider Woman, presents a different kind of terror. This creature is a shape-shifting spider that can transform into a beautiful woman to lure unsuspecting victims. Once its prey is ensnared, the Joragumo reveals its true, monstrous form, a nightmarish spider with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. It is said that the Joragumo can spin webs that trap and consume its victims, her beautiful guise a deadly trap. The horror of the Joragumo lies in its dual nature, the deceptive beauty that masks a monstrous predator. This fear of being deceived by appearances, of encountering a predator hiding behind a facade of charm, resonates deeply. The Joragumo embodies the terror of being caught in a web of deceit, of falling prey to something that appears attractive but is profoundly dangerous. Both the Rokurokubi and the Joragumo reflect deep-seated anxieties about the boundaries between appearance and reality. They represent fears of the monstrous lurking within the everyday, the terror of being deceived and ensnared by something that defies normal expectations. These figures are not just monsters but symbols of the deeper fears that lie beneath the surface of human experience. As Japanese folklore evolved and spread, the eerie qualities of the Rokurokubi and Joragumo began to influence modern vampire myths. The transformation of these figures into contemporary vampire legends reflects a shift in how these ancient fears are understood and depicted. In modern vampire lore, the themes of deception, transformation, and predation that are central to the Rokurokubi and Joragumo continue to resonate. The modern vampire, with its ability to blend into human society while hiding a monstrous nature, echoes the terror of the Rokurokubi's stretching neck and the Joragumo's deceptive beauty. Contemporary vampires often possess the power to seduce and manipulate, a reflection of the Joragumo's ability to lure victims with its alluring guise. The fear of being betrayed by appearances, of encountering something that seems benign but is profoundly dangerous, is a common thread in both traditional Japanese myths and modern vampire stories. In the realm of popular culture, these ancient figures have also found new expressions. The transformation of the Rokurokubi and Joragumo into modern vampire myths highlights a universal fear of the unknown and the deceptive nature of appearances. This evolution is a testament to the enduring power of these ancient stories and their ability to capture the darker aspects of human experience. The stories of the Rokurokubi and Joragumo continue to haunt and captivate, their eerie qualities shaping the way we understand and fear vampires. They remind us of the primal fears that lurk within the human psyche, fears of deception, transformation, and predation that transcend time and culture. As these ancient myths are woven into the fabric of modern vampire lore, they carry forward the chilling legacy of terror and fascination that has captivated imaginations for centuries. In the quiet corners of Korean folklore, where shadows blend with ancient traditions, a figure of haunting beauty and terror emerges, the Cheonyo Gwishin. This ghostly entity, known as the Virgin Ghost, reveals a profound and chilling aspect of Korean mythology that intertwines with the fearsome traits of vampires. The Cheonyo Gwishin is a spirit of a young woman who died under tragic or unjust circumstances, often before she had the chance to marry. Her death leaves her trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead, forever bound to her sorrow and anger. This vengeful spirit, with its lingering attachment to the world of the living, embodies a profound and unsettling fear. The Cheonyo Gwishin's vampiric aspects come from her malevolent nature. Though she might appear as a beautiful young woman, her true form is far more terrifying. Her beauty is a mask that hides a monstrous intent. She is known to prey on the living, often seeking to drain their life force or bring misfortune to those who cross her path. Her tragic fate transforms her into a predator of the night, driven by a deep sense of injustice and sorrow. What makes the Cheonyo Gwishin particularly eerie is her connection to the concept of vengeance. Her anger and pain from her untimely death fuel her actions, making her a relentless and dangerous spirit. She seeks out the living not just to satisfy a hunger, but to exact retribution for the wrongs she suffered. This sense of unfinished business, combined with her vampiric traits, creates a chilling figure who embodies the fear of being hunted by an entity that is both a victim and a predator. The cultural context of the Cheonyo Gwishin adds layers of depth to her story. In Korean culture, respect for the dead and proper rites are deeply significant. A tragic or unjust death, especially one that involves young, unmarried women, often leaves a profound sense of imbalance and sorrow. The Cheonyo Gwishin represents this imbalance, a manifestation of cultural anxieties about death and the afterlife. Her story serves as a reminder of the importance of proper rituals and the dangers of neglecting the needs of the dead. The influence of the Cheonyo Gwishin on Korean mythology and beyond can be seen in how this figure has shaped modern interpretations of spirits and vampires. Her traits, her beauty masking a terrifying nature, her need for retribution, and her predatory behavior echo in contemporary ghost stories and vampire myths. In modern Korean media and literature, the Cheonyo Gwishin story is adapted and reimagined, maintaining her role as a figure of both beauty and horror. Her story reflects a universal fear of the undead, of spirits that linger and seek to disrupt the lives of the living. The Cheonyo Gwishin's tale taps into deep-seated anxieties about death, justice, and the supernatural, resonating with the broader human fear of encountering entities that defy natural order and seek retribution. In Korean folklore, the Cheonyo Gwishin stands as a haunting reminder of the impact of tragic and untimely death. Her vampiric aspects, combined with her cultural significance, make her a powerful and chilling figure in the world of spirits and legends. She embodies the intersection of beauty and horror, vengeance and sorrow, making her a figure that continues to captivate and terrify through the ages. In the dark, wintry forests and vast plains of Native American folklore, a figure emerges that strikes fear into the hearts of those who hear its tale, the wendigo. This creature, steeped in ancient myth, embodies a unique and horrifying blend of vampiric traits that reflect the deep-seated fears and cultural beliefs of the tribes who tell its story. The wendigo is not just a monster, it is a chilling embodiment of greed, hunger, and the loss of humanity. Described as a gaunt, emaciated figure with a heart of ice, the wendigo is driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Its appearance alone is enough to instill terror. Its skeletal frame, glowing eyes, and twisted, monstrous face represent the ultimate horror of being consumed by an unending appetite. What makes the wendigo particularly terrifying is its vampiric nature. The wendigo's hunger is not merely for food but for human flesh and souls. This ravenous desire is so overwhelming that it transforms the wendigo into a predator of the most unsettling kind. Those who encounter the wendigo face a creature that not only consumes their bodies but threatens to devour their very essence. The wendigo is a manifestation of a hunger that transcends the physical, representing a deep, spiritual corruption. The wendigo's tale often involves themes of isolation and transformation. In many stories, a person who succumbs to extreme hunger or isolation in the harsh winter conditions becomes the wendigo. This transformation is not just a physical change, but a profound moral and spiritual fall. The wendigo represents the ultimate loss of humanity, driven by a ravenous hunger that turns a person into something monstrous and terrifying. This transformation reflects fears about the corrupting power of greed and the devastating effects of isolation. Regional variations of the wendigo legend add layers of complexity to its portrayal. In some traditions, the wendigo is seen as a malevolent spirit that can possess individuals, driving them to commit horrific acts. In others, it is depicted as a physical creature that roams the forests, stalking its prey with an unrelenting hunger. These variations highlight different aspects of the wendigo's terror, whether it is the fear of becoming a monster oneself or the dread of encountering a predatory being in the wilderness. Despite these variations, the wendigo's core traits remain consistent across traditions. Its vampiric nature, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh, and its transformation from a human into a monster reflect deep-seated fears about the loss of control and the degradation of the human spirit. The wendigo embodies the fear of the unknown and the dangers that lie beyond the familiar, making it a powerful and enduring figure in Native American folklore. The wendigo story serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of greed, isolation, and the loss of humanity. Its vampiric traits, combined with its unsettling appearance and the fear it evokes, make the wendigo a figure that continues to captivate and terrify. In the tales of the wendigo, we find a reflection of our deepest fears about the nature of hunger, both physical and spiritual, and the terrifying potential for transformation that lies within us all. In the rich tapestry of African folklore, two figures stand out as chilling embodiments of vampiric fear, the Asambasam and the Adze. These creatures are not just mythical beings but powerful symbols that reflect deeper anxieties and cultural beliefs, weaving a tapestry of horror and mystery that captures the imagination. The Asambasam, a creature from the folklore of the Akan people of West Africa, is a nightmarish entity that embodies pure dread. With its ghastly appearance, sharp iron teeth, and hooks for feet, the Asambasam is a predator lurking in the shadows. It is said to live in the trees, waiting for unsuspecting victims to pass beneath. With a swift and deadly strike, it captures its prey using its fearsome claws, dragging them up into the canopy where it feasts on their blood. The Asambasam's eerie nature and horrific diet make it a figure of terror, blending the physical horror of its appearance with the psychological fear of being hunted from above. The role of the Asambasam in folklore extends beyond its predatory nature. It represents the fear of the unknown lurking in the familiar, such as the dark, shadowy places we often take for granted. The idea of a creature that hides in trees and attacks from above taps into a primal fear of being ambushed in a place where we should feel safe. The Asambasam's gruesome appearance and its unsettling method of attack make it a potent symbol of danger that lurks in the shadows, reminding people of the constant threats that can emerge from the darkness. The Adze, another fearsome creature from the Yu and other southern Ghanaian traditions, brings a different kind of horror. Unlike the Asambasam, the Adze is a shapeshifter, capable of transforming from a harmless firefly into a terrifying vampire-like entity. It is said to prey on children and sick individuals, draining their blood and spreading disease. The Adze's ability to shift between forms makes it a particularly insidious figure, as it can be both alluring and deadly. Its transformation from a harmless insect to a bloodthirsty predator taps into fears of deceit and the terror of an enemy that can appear benign but is capable of great harm. The Adze's role in folklore highlights concerns about disease and vulnerability. By preying on the sick and the weak, the Adze symbolizes the fear of unseen threats and the helplessness of being preyed upon by something that is both familiar and alien. Its shape-shifting nature reflects anxieties about the deceptive appearances of dangers that lie hidden beneath a seemingly harmless exterior. The Adze embodies the fear of not knowing who or what to trust, as well as the terror of encountering a threat that is always just out of sight. Both the Asambasam and the Ads serve as powerful symbols in African folklore, illustrating a universal fear of predators that strike from the darkness and the anxiety of deceptive appearances. These creatures are more than just mythical beings. They reflect deep cultural concerns about safety, trust, and the hidden dangers that can lurk in everyday life. Through their terrifying traits and roles in folklore, the Asambasam and the Ads continue to captivate and unsettle, embodying the primal fears that resonate across cultures and time. In the dense, dark forests and arid landscapes of South America, a creature of terror has emerged from the shadows, casting a long and unsettling shadow over the region's folklore, the Chupacabra. This enigmatic being, whose name translates to goatsucker, has stirred fear and fascination across continents, and its origins reveal a chilling blend of myth and reality. The Chupacabra is described as a grotesque, vampiric entity that preys on livestock, especially goats. Its name derives from the gruesome practice of draining the blood from its victims, leaving behind lifeless bodies. Eyewitness accounts paint a nightmarish picture of the Chupacabra, a creature with spines running down its back, alien-like eyes, and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Some descriptions even suggest it resembles a reptilian monster, others depict it as a hairless, dog-like beast. This blend of features creates an image that is both unfamiliar and horrifying, evoking a primal fear of something that defies the natural order. The origins of the Chupacabra are as mysterious as the creature itself. The legend began in Puerto Rico in the 1990s when reports surfaced of livestock being found dead, drained of blood, with no signs of struggle. These reports quickly spread, evolving into a myth that has captivated the imagination of people far beyond the island. What started as a local legend has grown into an international phenomenon, reflecting deeper anxieties about the unknown and the dangerous. The Chupacabra's vampiric traits, its blood-draining habit and its predatory nature, mirror classic vampire lore but with a distinct twist. Unlike traditional vampires, which often have human-like features and are driven by a need for human blood, the Chupacabra is more beastly and its prey is livestock. This shift from human to animal prey highlights a unique aspect of South American vampire myths, a fear of supernatural entities disrupting everyday life, not just among people but also among their most valuable resources. This creature's influence on modern vampire lore is significant. The Chupacabra has become a symbol of fear and mystery that transcends its South American origins. Its story taps into the universal anxiety of facing something that defies understanding and challenges the natural order. The Chupacabra's ability to blend into the shadows, strike without warning, and leave its victims drained and lifeless resonates with the primal fear of unseen threats and the terror of being preyed upon by something unknown. Indigenous beliefs also play a crucial role in shaping the Chupacabra legend. In many South American cultures, supernatural beings and spirits are deeply intertwined with daily life and nature. The Chupacabra, with its vampiric habits and elusive nature, reflects a broader cultural fear of entities that disrupt the balance of life and prey upon the vulnerable. It embodies the fear of the unknown in the natural world, a fear that has been present in indigenous myths for centuries and is now expressed through modern legends. The Chupacabra's impact on contemporary vampire myths underscores the way traditional fears evolve and adapt to new contexts. Its story has merged with other vampire lore, influencing how modern audiences perceive and understand these supernatural creatures. The blend of ancient fears with new myths creates a chilling tapestry of horror that spans cultures and continents. The legend of the Chupacabra continues to haunt and fascinate, its image of a blood-draining predator forever etched into the collective consciousness. Through its terrifying traits and its influence on modern vampire lore, the Chupacabra serves as a powerful reminder of the fears that lurk just beyond the edge of the known world. In the chilling fog of medieval Europe, where superstition and fear intertwined with everyday life, the figure of the vampire emerged as a terrifying symbol of death and decay. During this period, the vampire was more than just a figure of folklore, it was a palpable threat that haunted the lives of countless people. The early beliefs about vampires in medieval Europe were shaped by a mix of ancient superstitions and the harsh realities of life. People lived in an age where disease was often unexplained, and death came swiftly and unexpectedly. When a person died under mysterious or tragic circumstances, it was not uncommon for the community to suspect that the deceased had returned from the grave as a vampire. This fear was often fueled by the sight of bodies that appeared unnaturally preserved or by the spread of disease that could not be explained by contemporary medical knowledge. Vampire beliefs were closely tied to various practices meant to ward off these dreaded creatures. In some regions, people would stake corpses through the heart, believing that this would prevent the dead from rising. Others would place objects like sickles or pieces of iron in the graves to keep the dead from coming back. These rituals were driven by a deep-seated fear of the undead and a desperate need to protect themselves from the perceived threat of vampirism. Historical accounts from this period offer a chilling glimpse into the vampire panic that gripped Europe. One of the most infamous cases was that of Peter Plagojewicz, a Serbian peasant who died in 1725. After his death, reports spread that Plagojewicz had risen from the grave to prey on his neighbors. The terrified villagers claimed that he appeared at night, causing death and disease. In response, the local authorities exhumed his body and found it to be remarkably well preserved. This discovery led to a public execution of the corpse, where it was staked and burned in an effort to stop the supposed vampiric threat. Such stories were not isolated incidents. Throughout Europe, numerous cases were reported where bodies were exhumed and subjected to grisly rituals. Accounts from different countries tell of bodies found with bloated appearances, blood at the mouth, and even evidence of teeth marks on the victims. These signs were interpreted as proof of vampirism, leading to widespread panic and violent actions against the dead. The fear of vampires during the medieval period was not merely a superstition but a reflection of the real anxieties of the time. The lack of understanding about disease and the frequent occurrence of plagues meant that people were desperate to explain the causes of suffering and death. Vampires became a convenient explanation for the inexplicable, embodying the terror of death and the fear of the unknown. The vampire's image during this era was that of a monstrous revenant, a creature that defied natural laws and preyed on the living. This figure was deeply ingrained in the collective psyche of medieval Europeans, representing the ultimate horror of death that could not be contained. The rituals and practices to combat vampirism were driven by a profound fear of the dead and a desire to exert control over the uncontrollable. As these practices spread, they were often recorded with a mixture of dread and fascination. The vampire's role in medieval Europe was a reflection of the era's fears and uncertainties. The accounts of these early vampires paint a vivid picture of a time when the line between life and death was blurred, and the dead were feared as much as they were mourned. The legacy of these medieval beliefs has left an indelible mark on our modern understanding of vampires. The historical accounts, combined with the rituals and fears of the time, shaped the vampire lore that continues to captivate and terrify today. The image of the vampire as a predatory and undead creature has its roots in these early beliefs, reflecting a timeless fear of death and the unknown that transcends centuries. In the shadows of the 14th century, a darkness spread across Europe that was more terrifying than any nightmare: the Black Death. This plague, which swept through the continent with ruthless efficiency, left a trail of death and suffering that shaped the fears and folklore of the time. The horror of the Black Death gave rise to an unsettling twist in vampire myths, intertwining the terror of disease with the fear of the undead. As the Black Death ravaged towns and villages, the sheer scale of death and the speed at which it spread were incomprehensible. People saw entire communities decimated, with the once bustling streets now silent and empty. The plague was a relentless killer, with no clear understanding of its causes or cures. In this climate of fear and confusion, the notion of vampires took on new, horrifying dimensions. The symptoms of the plague were gruesome: boils that burst with blackened pus, fever, and a rapid decline to death. To those who lived through it, the signs of the disease were so horrifying that they began to see connections between these symptoms and the ancient fears of the undead. The appearance of plague victims, with their darkened, swollen limbs, seemed to echo descriptions of vampires. This resemblance fueled the belief that the dead were not just deceased, but were returning to prey on the living. In a time when people struggled to understand the plague, it was easy to turn to supernatural explanations. The idea of vampires as carriers of disease took hold, with these creatures being seen as the cause of the plague rather than mere myth. Vampires were thought to spread death through their presence, and the symptoms of the plague, fever, chills, and the blackening of the skin, were eerily similar to what people imagined a vampire's bite might cause. This led to a frightening belief that the undead were not only causing the disease, but also feeding on the life force of the living. The fear of vampires during the Black Death was not just about the physical symptoms, but also about the sense of helplessness and dread that came with the plague. As people watched their loved ones fall victim to the disease, the line between reality and myth blurred. The vampire became a symbol of the ultimate fear of the unknown, a creature that could slip through the cracks of understanding and continue to cause suffering even after death. The plague's impact on vampire mythology extended to the practices and rituals used to combat the undead. In regions hardest hit by the Black Death, the exhumation of bodies and the staking of the dead became more common. People believed that these actions were necessary to prevent the dead from rising and spreading the plague further. The desperation to control the uncontrollable led to more extreme measures, reflecting a profound fear of both death and the possibility of the dead returning as malevolent beings. The Black Death's influence on vampire lore also manifested in art and literature. The images of the plague victims, swollen, darkened, and lifeless, were mirrored in depictions of vampires in medieval art. These representations amplified the connection between disease and vampirism, cementing the vampire's role as a symbol of death and decay. The dark, haunting images of the time captured the fear and horror that both the plague and the vampire evoked, merging these fears into a powerful, enduring myth. The terror of the Black Death and its influence on vampire myths underscore how deeply intertwined fears of disease and death are with our understanding of the supernatural. The plague shaped vampire lore in a way that reflected the real and palpable anxieties of the time. The vampire became more than just a mythical creature, it embodied the dread of an unstoppable, invisible force that could decimate lives and defy understanding. As the Black Death receded and Europe slowly recovered, the vampire remained a potent symbol of the fears that the plague had intensified. The connection between disease and the undead persisted, serving as a stark reminder of the terror that once swept through the continent. The legacy of the Black Death lives on in the vampire myths that continue to haunt our collective imagination, a testament to the enduring power of fear and the dark shadows it casts over our understanding of death. In the heart of Eastern Europe, where ancient forests loom like silent sentinels and mist curls around crumbling villages, the fear of vampires takes on a form both chilling and hauntingly vivid. Here, in the shadows of Slavic folklore, two terrifying figures, the Nosferatu and the Strigoi, emerge from the darkness, embodying a primal dread of the undead. The Nosferatu, a name that echoes through the chilling corridors of legend, represents one of the most feared vampire figures in Slavic culture. Unlike the suave, charismatic vampires of later Western legends, the Nosferatu is a grotesque, hideous creature. Described as having a gaunt, corpse-like appearance with elongated fangs and sharp, claw-like nails, the Nosferatu strikes terror into the hearts of those who hear its name. This vampire is not merely a creature of horror, but a harbinger of disease and death, embodying the fears of an uncontrollable force that preys upon the living. The Nosferatu's role in folklore is tied to its ability to instill fear and spread disease. It is often depicted as a being that lurks in the shadows, preying upon the vulnerable and the sick. Its presence is believed to cause illness and death, spreading a plague of fear and despair wherever it goes. This figure taps into deep-seated anxieties about disease and death, symbolizing the fear of an invisible threat that is both terrifying and omnipresent. The Strigoi, another haunting figure in Slavic folklore, adds a different dimension to the vampire mythos. Unlike the Nosferatu, the Strigoi is often portrayed as a deceased person who rises from the grave to torment the living. This vampire is closely tied to local traditions and superstitions, with its origins rooted in the belief that the dead can return to seek vengeance or continue their former lives in a more malevolent form. The Strigoi is believed to have a sinister ability to possess the living, turning them into other vampires, and it preys on its family and friends, causing death and misfortune. The draug's transformation from a regular person into a vampire reflects a profound fear of death and the idea that the deceased are never truly gone. This belief in the return of the dead as vengeful spirits speaks to a deep-rooted anxiety about the finality of death and the potential for the dead to disrupt the living world. The draug embodies the terror of facing loved ones who have become monstrous and malevolent, turning familiar faces into sources of horror. In Slavic cultures, rituals and beliefs surrounding vampires were deeply intertwined with everyday life. To protect themselves from the threat of vampires, people practiced a range of rituals designed to ward off these malevolent beings. One common practice involved placing objects like garlic, iron, or holy symbols around the home to keep vampires at bay. Garlic, in particular, was believed to have powerful properties that could repel evil spirits and prevent vampires from entering the home. Another prevalent ritual was the use of protective measures for the deceased. To prevent the dead from rising as vampires, people would often perform specific rituals during burial. These might include placing a cross or other protective symbols in the coffin, or even staking the body through the heart to ensure it could not return. The practice of staking, while gruesome, was rooted in a deep-seated fear of the undead and a desire to exert control over the uncontrollable. In some regions, more elaborate rituals were performed to address suspected vampires. For example, if a person was believed to have become a vampire, the body would be exhumed and examined for signs of vampirism, such as a bloated appearance or a face frozen in a grimace. If these signs were present, the body would be subjected to a variety of rituals intended to prevent it from rising again. These practices reflected the profound fear of the undead and the lengths to which people were willing to go to protect themselves from what they could not understand. The influence of Slavic vampire legends extends beyond folklore and rituals. The terrifying images of the Nosferatu and Strigoi have permeated literature, art, and popular culture, shaping the modern perception of vampires. These figures continue to evoke a sense of dread and fascination, representing the timeless fear of the undead and the darkness that lies just beyond the edge of understanding. In the end, the Nosferatu and the Strigoi are more than just mythical creatures, they are embodiments of deep-seated fears and cultural anxieties. Their stories reflect a timeless struggle against the forces of darkness and death, capturing the essence of what it means to confront the unknown. Through their chilling presence and the rituals designed to ward them off, these Slavic vampire legends continue to haunt and captivate, reminding us of the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie in the shadows. In the cold, dark expanse of Scandinavia, where the winter nights stretch endlessly and the fjords echo with ancient tales, the fear of the undead takes on a shape both haunting and formidable, the draugr. This terrifying figure, rooted in Norse mythology, embodies a primal fear of death and decay that transcends time and continues to captivate the imagination. The draugr is more than just a ghostly apparition, it is a corpse that has returned from the grave with a thirst for vengeance and a hunger for the living. Described as having a ghastly, bloated appearance, with rotting flesh and an odor of death, the draugr stands as a grotesque reminder of the dead's power to disrupt the living world. Unlike other undead figures, the draugr is not just a spirit, but a physical being that retains its strength and malevolence even after death. In the chilling tales of the draugr, it is said that these creatures rise from their graves to haunt their former homes and families. They possess a supernatural strength and are capable of inflicting great harm on those who cross their path. Often, they are driven by a deep-seated grudge or a desire to protect their burial treasures, making them both feared and loathed by those who live in their shadow. The draugr's ability to cause illness and death further cements its role as a symbol of fear and dread. One of the most chilling aspects of the draugr is its ability to grow in size and strength after death. As it feeds on the living, it becomes more powerful and more monstrous, making it an ever-growing threat. This ability to increase its power by preying on the living creates a sense of impending doom, as the draugr becomes a relentless force that cannot be easily stopped. The idea of an ever-growing terror that feeds on the living speaks to a deep-seated fear of an unstoppable force that can grow stronger with each encounter. The draugr's influence on later vampire legends is profound. Its physical form and malevolent behavior lay the groundwork for many aspects of the vampire mythos that would emerge in later European folklore. The concept of a revenant with the ability to cause harm and feed on the living directly parallels many modern depictions of vampires. The draugr's role as a powerful and malevolent being who disrupts the natural order echoes in the tales of vampires that would come to dominate Western literature and culture. In Scandinavian tradition, various rituals were employed to protect against the draugr and other undead beings. One common practice involved placing large stones on graves or using iron objects to prevent the dead from rising. These measures reflect a deep-seated belief in the power of physical barriers to keep malevolent forces at bay. In some cases, people would also engage in rituals to appease or ward off the draugr, demonstrating a cultural effort to manage the threat posed by these terrifying entities. The impact of the draugr extends beyond folklore into modern popular culture. The chilling characteristics of the draugr, its physical decay, its thirst for vengeance, and its growing power have been absorbed into the broader vampire mythos. These traits can be seen in contemporary depictions of vampires, which often emphasize their supernatural strength and the terror they inspire. The draugr's legacy lives on in the modern imagination, shaping how we perceive and fear the undead. The tales of the draugr and their chilling presence in Scandinavian folklore offer a powerful glimpse into the human fear of death and the unknown. The image of the draugr as a rotting, vengeful corpse resonates with our deepest anxieties about the end of life and the possibility of what lies beyond. The fear of the draugr, with its ability to rise from the grave and inflict harm, reflects a timeless struggle against the forces of darkness and the terror of facing the dead. As the myths of the draugr spread and evolve, they continue to capture the imagination of those who hear their stories. The draugr's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of fear and the universal fascination with the undead. In the icy landscapes of Scandinavia, where the draugr once roamed, the echoes of these ancient fears continue to haunt and captivate, reminding us of the timeless struggle against the darkness that lies just beyond the grave. In the misty glens and ancient forests of Celtic lands, where the whispers of the past echo through the trees, two figures from Celtic mythology emerge with chilling tales of the undead, the Dullahan and the Alsi. These spectral beings, wrapped in the dark fabric of ancient fears, weave a haunting narrative that lingers in the shadows of modern vampire myths. The Dullahan, a headless horseman, rides through the night with a terrifying presence. This ghostly figure is often seen carrying its own head under one arm, a grisly reminder of the life it once had. The Dullahan's appearance is as horrifying as it is unforgettable, a headless corpse mounted on a black steed, its empty neck gaping, and its detached head grinning with a malevolent satisfaction. Its presence is accompanied by an eerie silence, broken only by the clatter of its horse's hooves and the chilling sound of its headless form riding through the night. This spectral rider is not merely a harbinger of fear, it is an omen of death. The Dullahan is believed to appear to those about to meet their end, its appearance signaling the imminent arrival of death. The head it carries, often described as glowing with a supernatural light, is said to be capable of seeing everything within its sight. Those who encounter the Dullahan are gripped by an icy terror, knowing that their fate is sealed by this ghostly figure of doom. The Alsi, on the other hand, are a group of supernatural beings often associated with the fairies of Celtic lore. These entities, also known as the people of the mounds, are deeply entwined with the natural and supernatural world. Though they are not vampires in the traditional sense, their connection to the spirit world and their ability to influence human lives gives them a spectral quality that resonates with vampiric themes. The Alsi are often depicted as beautiful but dangerous, capable of both enchantment and malevolence. They are said to reside in ancient mounds and barrows, places of deep mystery and ancient power. Their influence over the living is profound. They can bring misfortune, illness, and even death. Their ability to control the natural world and their connections to the dead mirrors some of the characteristics associated with vampires, particularly in their capacity to inflict harm and their otherworldly presence. Both the Dullahan and the Alsi share a common thread with modern vampire myths through their connection to death and the supernatural. The Dullahan's role as an omen of death and its eerie, headless form echo the terror and fascination with undead beings that we see in contemporary vampire stories. The image of a headless rider, carrying its own head and heralding death, resonates with the modern portrayal of vampires as figures that exist on the edge of life and death, embodying our deepest fears and anxieties. Similarly, the owl's ability to cause harm and their connection to the spirit world reflect a broader theme in vampire mythology: the blurring of lines between the living and the dead, and the fear of an unknown, supernatural force that can influence and disrupt our lives. The owl's enchanting yet dangerous nature mirrors the seductive yet perilous qualities of modern vampires, who often straddle the line between allure and terror. The influence of these Celtic figures on modern vampire myths is profound. The headless Dullahan, with its haunting presence and role as a harbinger of death, has inspired countless tales of ghostly riders and spectral figures in contemporary literature and media. The owl's connection to the supernatural and their ability to inflict harm continue to echo in the portrayal of vampires as beings with otherworldly powers and malevolent intentions. In Celtic mythology, the Dullahan and the owl's are more than just frightening figures; they are manifestations of deep-seated fears and the mysteries of the unknown. Their stories capture the imagination with their eerie presence and their connection to death and the supernatural. As these ancient myths blend into modern vampire lore, they remind us of the timeless nature of our fears and the enduring power of the supernatural to captivate and terrify. In the dimly lit halls of medieval castles and the shadowy corners of ancient manuscripts, the eerie tales of vampires began to take shape, weaving a spellbinding narrative that continues to haunt us today. These medieval texts, with their vivid depictions of the undead, laid the groundwork for the vampire stories that captivate modern audiences. In the heart of medieval literature, we find glimpses of creatures that stir both fear and fascination. One such figure is the Revenant, a corpse that has returned from the grave to torment the living. These Revenants were often described with ghastly detail, their decaying bodies animated by a malevolent force. They would rise from their burial sites, driven by a desire for vengeance or an insatiable thirst for blood. The chilling image of a corpse clawing its way out of the earth to prey upon the living was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest souls. One of the most evocative examples comes from the 12th century English historian William of Newburgh, who recounted several tales of revenants in his work Historia Rerum Anglicarum. In one such tale, a man who led a sinful life returns from the dead to haunt his former village, spreading terror and disease. This tale, with its vivid imagery and the palpable sense of dread, mirrors the essence of modern vampire stories, where the undead walk among us, bringing death and fear. Medieval texts also speak of the strigoi, a term that would later come to be associated with vampires. These beings were believed to be malevolent spirits or undead creatures that could transform into animals and drain the life force of their victims. The strigoi would rise from their graves, their presence often heralded by a chilling silence and the inexplicable death of livestock or villagers. These early depictions are strikingly similar to the vampires we recognize today, with their shape-shifting abilities and their need to feed on the living. The fear of the undead in medieval literature was not limited to these horrifying figures alone. It extended to the realm of dreams and the subconscious, where vampires could enter the minds of the living, instilling fear and causing physical harm. The idea that a creature could invade one's dreams and manipulate reality added a layer of psychological terror to the already frightening physical presence of the vampire. This blending of the physical and the psychological created a complex and multifaceted horror that resonates with modern vampire tales. The influence of these medieval depictions on modern vampire stories is profound. The Revenants' return from the grave, the Strigoi's shape-shifting abilities, and the psychological terror they instilled all find echoes in contemporary vampire literature and cinema. The Gothic atmosphere, the themes of death and resurrection, and the ever-present fear of the unknown are elements that have been carried forward and elaborated upon in modern storytelling. Take, for instance, Bram Stoker's Dracula, a cornerstone of modern vampire fiction. The eerie Transylvanian landscape, the undead Count Dracula who preys on the living, and the palpable sense of dread all draw heavily from the medieval tradition of vampire tales. Stoker's Dracula is, in many ways, a revenant, a nobleman who has returned from the dead to seek out his victims, much like the figures in William of Newburgh's accounts. The transformation abilities of Dracula, turning into a bat or mist, also hark back to the Strygoish shape-shifting powers. The psychological horror present in medieval vampire tales finds its counterpart in modern stories that explore the vampire's ability to influence and control the minds of their victims. The fear of losing one's autonomy, of being manipulated by an undead force, is a theme that resonates deeply in contemporary narratives. This element of psychological control adds a layer of complexity to the vampire myth, making it not just a story of physical survival but also one of mental and emotional endurance. In cinema, the gothic horror of medieval vampire tales is vividly brought to life. Films like Nosferatu and the various adaptations of Dracula visually capture the haunting essence of medieval depictions, with their shadowy, foreboding settings and the ever-present threat of the undead. The visual representation of vampires as both alluring and terrifying, with their pale skin, sharp fangs, and predatory nature, draws a direct line from the medieval imagination to the modern screen. Even in contemporary literature, the legacy of medieval vampire myths is evident. Authors continue to explore the themes of death, resurrection, and the supernatural with a nod to the past. The enduring popularity of vampire stories, from Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles to Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series, showcases the timeless appeal of these ancient fears. The role of vampires in medieval literature was to embody the deepest fears of death and the unknown, to serve as a reminder of the thin veil between life and death. These tales, with their vivid imagery and haunting themes, have left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness, influencing how we perceive and fear the undead. As we turn the pages of modern vampire stories or watch their cinematic adaptations, we are, in many ways, still peering into the dark corners of medieval imagination, where the undead roam and the line between life and death is forever blurred. In the flickering glow of candlelight, Renaissance thinkers began to cast a new light on the shadowy figures of vampire lore. The era, marked by a revival of art, literature, and human inquiry, also witnessed a transformation in the way these creatures were perceived. As the world began to open up to new ideas, the myths surrounding vampires evolved, intertwining with the rich tapestry of Renaissance culture. Imagine standing in the grand halls of a Renaissance palace, where the air is thick with the scent of oil paints and the sounds of lutes and harpsichords. It is here, amid the burgeoning appreciation for beauty and human potential, that the vampire myths of old began to morph into something both terrifying and strangely alluring. During this period, the fearsome images of revenants and strigoi began to be infused with a sense of tragic elegance. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on humanism and the exploration of the human condition, began to portray vampires not merely as monstrous entities but as complex beings caught between life and death. The vampire's eternal struggle, their curse of immortality, and their insatiable hunger for life force were themes that resonated deeply with the period's artistic and literary minds. In the pages of Renaissance literature, vampires began to emerge as symbols of forbidden desire and the consequences of transgression. The lush prose of poets and playwrights painted vampires as figures of dark allure, creatures who embodied the seduction and danger of breaking societal norms. The vampire's kiss, once a mere act of predation, transformed into a metaphor for the seductive power of the unknown and the fear of losing one's humanity. Art, too, played a significant role in reshaping vampire mythology. Painters of the Renaissance, with their keen eye for human emotion and their masterful use of light and shadow, began to depict vampires in ways that evoked both fear and empathy. The chiaroscuro technique, which used strong contrasts between light and dark, became a powerful tool in portraying the duality of the vampire's existence, both a creature of the night and a tragic figure yearning for the warmth of life. One can almost feel the chill of the night air in Caravaggio's haunting works, where the interplay of darkness and light reveals the torment of the soul. In these paintings, the vampire's pale visage and piercing eyes stand out against the shadows, drawing the viewer into a world where beauty and horror coexist in a delicate balance. This artistic portrayal echoed the Renaissance fascination with the supernatural and the unknown, making the vampire both a symbol of fear and an object of dark fascination. Literature of the time further cemented this evolving image. The works of writers such as Shakespeare subtly incorporated elements of vampire lore into their tales of ambition, power, and forbidden love. The character of Lady Macbeth, with her blood-stained hands and insatiable thirst for power, can be seen as a metaphorical vampire, driven by a hunger that ultimately leads to her downfall. These literary explorations of vampiric themes reflected the Renaissance preoccupation with the boundaries of human experience and the consequences of succumbing to darker impulses. As the Renaissance gave way to the early modern period, the influence of science and reason began to reshape vampire myths even further. The age of exploration and the scientific revolution brought with them new understandings of the natural world and the human body. Reports of strange creatures from distant lands and the burgeoning field of anatomy provided fertile ground for reimagining the vampire. The vampire's transformation continued in the minds of early modern thinkers who sought to explain the supernatural through the lens of science. The previously inexplicable phenomena of death and decomposition began to be studied in detail, leading to more grounded explanations for the eerie tales of the undead. Yet, even as science sought to demystify the vampire, the myths persisted, now intertwined with the emerging understanding of disease and decay. In literature, the vampire began to be depicted as a carrier of contagion, a reflection of the fears surrounding plague and other illnesses that ravaged Europe. The idea of the vampire as a harbinger of death and disease resonated with a populace that had witnessed the devastating effects of epidemics. This new interpretation added another layer to the vampire myth, making it not only a creature of supernatural horror but also a symbol of the very real threats that lurked in the shadows of society. Art, too, continued to explore these themes. The macabre fascination with death and the afterlife, so prevalent in early modern art, often included vampiric elements. Skeletons, decaying bodies, and the danse macabre, depictions of death leading the living in a grim dance, reflected the pervasive fear of the unknown and the ever-present specter of mortality. In these works, the vampire stood as a reminder of the thin veil between life and death, a figure that embodied both the fear of the unknown and the inescapable reality of human frailty. The Renaissance and early modern views on vampires thus created a rich and multifaceted tapestry of myth and reality. Vampires became more than just bloodthirsty monsters, they were symbols of the human condition, exploring themes of desire, transgression, and the eternal struggle between life and death. This evolution of the vampire myth, influenced by the profound changes in art, literature, and science, laid the groundwork for the enduring fascination with these enigmatic creatures. Through the lens of the Renaissance and early modern periods, vampires emerged as complex beings, forever caught in the twilight between the worlds of the living and the dead. On cold, moonlit nights, the people of Eastern Europe would gather around their hearths, sharing stories that sent shivers down the spine. Among these tales were those of the vampire, a figure woven deeply into the cultural and societal fabric of the region. Here, the vampire was more than just a creature of the night. It was a symbol of the fears and hopes of the communities that believed in its existence. In the dark forests and remote villages of Eastern Europe, the vampire was a constant presence in the collective imagination. The stories varied from region to region, but certain elements remained consistent. The vampire was a revenant, a creature that had risen from the grave to feed on the living. It was often depicted as a close relative or neighbor, someone who had died prematurely or under suspicious circumstances, only to return with a thirst for blood. These vampires were not the suave, charismatic beings of modern lore. They were corpses, bloated and ready from their gruesome feasts, their shrouds stained with the blood of their victims. The sight of such a creature was enough to terrify even the bravest soul. The thought that a loved one, someone they had mourned and buried, could return as a monster was a fear that haunted many. In many villages, the belief in vampires was so strong that elaborate rituals were performed to prevent the dead from returning. Graves were often surrounded by thorny branches or sprinkled with seeds, as it was believed that the vampire would be compelled to count every grain before rising, delaying its return to the living. Stakes were driven through the hearts of the deceased, and in some cases, the heads were severed and buried separately to ensure they stayed in their graves. One of the most notorious vampire legends comes from Serbia, where the story of Sava Savanovic has been passed down through generations. Sava was said to be a miller who, after his death, returned as a vampire to haunt his old mill. Those who dared to enter the mill at night would find themselves drained of blood by morning. The mill, standing abandoned and foreboding, became a symbol of the terror that vampires instilled in the hearts of the villagers. Another chilling tale is that of the vampire Peter Plagojewicz from the village of Kisilova in present-day Serbia. In the early 18th century, 9 people in the village died under mysterious circumstances within 8 days. On their deathbeds, they claimed to have been visited by Plagojewicz, who had died shortly before the strange deaths began. Fearing the worst, the villagers exhumed his body and found it in a state of remarkable preservation, with fresh blood in his mouth. They drove a stake through his heart, and Plagojewicz supposedly let out a horrifying scream before finally being put to rest. In Romania, the figure of the strigoi added another layer to the vampire mythology. Strigoi were believed to be troubled spirits that could rise from the dead either due to a violent or untimely death or because of their wicked ways in life. They were said to be able to transform into animals, become invisible, and drain the life force from the living. The Romanian strigoi inspired fear and respect, with many villages performing rituals to appease these restless spirits and prevent them from wreaking havoc. The vampire was not just a figure of fear, but also a reflection of the societal and cultural dynamics of Eastern Europe. In times of plague and famine, when death was a constant companion, the vampire served as an explanation for the unexplained and the uncontrollable. It was a way for communities to make sense of the horrors they faced, attributing them to supernatural forces rather than random misfortune. These myths and legends were passed down through oral traditions, their details changing with each retelling but always retaining the core elements of fear, death, and the struggle between the living and the dead. There were stories that bonded communities, providing a shared narrative in times of uncertainty and fear. In the dim glow of the fire, as the wind howled outside and the shadows danced on the walls, the vampire took on a life of its own. It was a reminder of the thin veil between life and death, a symbol of the unknown that lurked just beyond the safety of the hearth. These tales of vampires, born out of the collective anxieties and beliefs of Eastern European societies, continue to resonate, their echoes heard in the modern myths and stories that still captivate us today. Under the shadow of colonization, vampire myths evolved and intertwined, creating new forms that reflected the mingling of cultures. When European settlers and explorers spread across the world, they brought with them their own fears and stories of vampires. In the colonies, these tales encountered indigenous beliefs and traditions, resulting in a fascinating blend of mythologies. Imagine a quiet village on the African coast, where stories of the Asambasam, a creature with iron teeth and iron hooks for feet, had long been told around the fire. This fearsome being, lurking in the treetops, would descend to feast on human blood. When European colonizers arrived, they brought their own vampire legends, featuring pale, aristocratic figures who drained the life from their victims. The merging of these myths created a new narrative, where the Asambasam took on characteristics of the European vampire, becoming a more sinister and elusive predator. In the dense jungles of South America, the indigenous people spoke of the Chupacabra, a creature said to drink the blood of livestock. This legend predated European contact, but as stories of vampires arrived with the colonizers, the Chupacabra myth began to shift. The creature, once a part of local lore, began to take on the traits of European vampires, becoming more monstrous and bloodthirsty. The fear of this creature was not just a reflection of local beliefs, but also a symbol of the anxieties and disruptions brought by colonization. In the Caribbean, the blending of African, European, and indigenous beliefs led to the creation of unique vampire myths. The succulent, a creature from Caribbean folklore, was said to shed its skin at night and transform into a ball of fire, seeking out victims to drain their blood. This myth, influenced by African traditions and European vampire stories, embodied the fears and uncertainties of a people living under colonial rule. The succulent was not just a monster, but a symbol of the hidden dangers and sorrows of a colonized land. The influence of European vampire lore was also felt in India, where the Vedala, a spirit inhabiting corpses, had long been part of Hindu mythology. With the arrival of British colonizers, the Vedala began to be portrayed in ways that mirrored European vampire characteristics. Stories of these beings, lurking in cemeteries and preying on the living, reflected the cultural exchange and tensions of the colonial period. The Vedala, once a guardian of sacred places, became a feared figure, embodying the anxieties of a society in transition. In the Philippines, the manananggal, a vampiric creature that could sever its upper body to fly in search of prey, became intertwined with Spanish vampire myths. The arrival of the Spanish colonizers brought new layers to the manananggal legend, blending local beliefs with European fears of the undead. This creature, with its grotesque transformation and insatiable hunger, became a symbol of the blending of cultures and the lasting impact of colonial rule. Even in North America, the arrival of European settlers brought changes to indigenous vampire myths. The wendigo, a creature from Native American lore, was said to be a spirit of insatiable hunger, driving people to cannibalism. As European stories of vampires spread, the wendigo began to take on more vampiric traits, becoming a creature that fed on the living to satiate its eternal hunger. This blending of myths reflected the complex interactions between indigenous peoples and European settlers, highlighting the fears and uncertainties of a changing world. The impact of colonization on vampire beliefs was profound, creating a rich tapestry of myths that reflected the blending of cultures and the anxieties of a colonized world. These stories, passed down through generations, were not just tales of monsters but reflections of the struggles and fears of the people who told them. The vampire, whether it was the Asanbasam, the Chupacabra, the Sucuyant, the Vedala, the Manananggal, or the Wendigo, became a symbol of the hidden dangers and sorrows of a world in flux. In the quiet moments of the night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the shadows danced on the walls, these stories came to life. They were more than just tales of terror. They were a way for people to make sense of their world, to understand the unseen forces that shaped their lives. The vampire, in its many forms, was a reminder of the thin line between life and death, between the known and the unknown, between the past and the present. These myths continue to evolve, reflecting the ongoing blending of cultures and the ever-changing fears and hopes of the people who tell them. The vampire, with its timeless allure and endless hunger, remains a powerful symbol, a reminder of the shadows that linger at the edges of our understanding. In the dim glow of a flickering screen, a shadowy figure emerges, captivating hearts and minds across the globe. The vampire, once a creature of ancient myth, has transformed into a cultural icon, haunting the pages of books, the frames of films, and the imaginations of millions. This transition from ancient legend to contemporary culture is nothing short of mesmerizing, as the vampire's allure continues to grow, captivating each new generation. Centuries ago, vampires were whispered about in hushed tones, their stories passed down through generations as cautionary tales. These beings, with their insatiable hunger for blood, were feared and revered, their presence a reminder of the thin veil between life and death. As societies evolved and storytelling mediums changed, so did the vampire. From the ancient, shadowy figures of folklore to the sophisticated, seductive characters of modern media, the vampire has undergone a remarkable transformation. Literature was one of the first realms to embrace the vampire, immortalizing it in ink. Bram Stoker's Dracula, published in 1897, brought the vampire into the Victorian era, introducing readers to Count Dracula, a character that would become the archetype of the modern vampire. Stoker's tale of the Transylvanian nobleman who preys on the innocent was more than just a horror story, it was a reflection of the anxieties and fears of the time. The novel's success cemented the vampire's place in popular culture, inspiring countless adaptations and reinterpretations. As the 20th century progressed, vampires began to appear in other forms of media, each iteration adding new layers to the mythos. The silver screen became a new home for these creatures of the night, with the 1922 silent film Nosferatu introducing audiences to Count Orlok, a ghastly figure whose image still haunts viewers today. This film, an unauthorized adaptation of Stoker's novel, captured the eerie, otherworldly essence of the vampire, cementing its place in cinematic history. The vampire's journey through film continued, evolving with each decade. In the 1930s, Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dracula in the Universal Pictures classic brought a new level of sophistication and charm to the character, forever associating the vampire with a certain aristocratic elegance. This portrayal influenced countless films and television shows, each one building on the foundations laid by its predecessors. In the latter half of the 20th century, the vampire underwent yet another transformation. And Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, beginning with Interview with the Vampire in 1976, introduced readers to a new kind of vampire, one that was introspective, tortured, and deeply human. Rice's vampires were complex characters, grappling with their immortality and the moral implications of their actions. These stories resonated with readers, adding depth and nuance to the vampire mythos. The 21st century saw the vampire's popularity reach new heights, thanks in large part to the advent of television and film franchises that brought these creatures into the homes of millions. The Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer, with its star-crossed lovers and brooding, sparkling vampires, captivated a global audience, especially young adults. This modern take on the vampire myth introduced a new generation to the allure of the undead, blending romance with supernatural elements. Television series like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and True Blood further explored the vampire's place in contemporary culture. Buffy, with its mix of high school drama and supernatural battles, portrayed vampires as both terrifying adversaries and sympathetic figures. True Blood, based on the Southern Vampire Mysteries by Charlaine Harris, delved into the complexities of vampire society, touching on themes of identity, acceptance, and the coexistence of humans and vampires. The vampire's influence extends beyond literature and film, permeating various aspects of popular culture. Music, fashion, and even video games have all been touched by the vampire's shadow. Bands like Bauhaus and My Chemical Romance have drawn inspiration from vampire aesthetics, while fashion designers have incorporated Gothic elements into their collections, channeling the dark elegance associated with these mythical beings. Video games like Castlevania and The Witcher series have allowed players to step into worlds where vampires are both enemies and allies, adding an interactive dimension to the myth. What is it about the vampire that continues to captivate us? Perhaps it is their duality, their ability to embody both the monstrous and the human. They are creatures of the night, yet they navigate the same emotional landscapes as we do: love, loss, desire, and fear. Their immortality is both a blessing and a curse, granting them eternal life, but also condemning them to an endless existence of isolation and longing. The vampire's enduring appeal lies in its versatility. It is a canvas onto which we project our deepest fears and desires, a mirror reflecting the changing concerns of society. In the Victorian era, vampires symbolized the fear of the unknown and the anxieties of a rapidly changing world. Today, they represent our fascination with immortality, our struggles with identity, and our desire for connection in an increasingly disconnected world. As we look to the future, it is clear that the vampire will continue to evolve, adapting to new storytelling mediums and societal changes. Whether through virtual reality experiences, immersive theater, or yet-to-be-imagined technologies, the vampire will remain a powerful figure in our collective imagination. Its journey from ancient myth to modern media is a testament to its enduring power, a reminder that some stories are timeless, forever lurking in the shadows, waiting to be told. In the quiet of night, when shadows stretch long and the world is bathed in moonlight, whispers of ancient tales echo through the ages. Tales of creatures that walk the line between life and death, feeding on the essence of the living. These creatures, known to us as vampires, are a haunting presence in the mythologies of many cultures. Despite the vast distances and different languages, there are striking similarities and intriguing differences in how these myths portray the vampire. The common threads woven through these stories and their influence on modern interpretations create a tapestry that is both beautiful and terrifying. One of the most compelling aspects of vampire myths is their shared characteristics. Across continents and centuries, vampires are often depicted as beings who must consume the life force of others to sustain themselves. In Europe, they are frequently described as blood drinkers, with sharp fangs and a thirst that can never be quenched. This image is echoed in the legends of the Strigoi in Romania and the Nosferatu in Slavic folklore. Similarly, in China, the jiangshi is a reanimated corpse that drains the life energy, or qi, from its victims, much like its European counterparts. Yet, not all vampires drink blood. In Africa, the adze takes the form of a firefly, only revealing its true, vampiric nature when caught. It feeds not on blood, but on the soul of its victim. This idea of soul consumption is also present in the Native American legend of the wendigo, a monstrous spirit driven by insatiable hunger, consuming the flesh and spirit of those it encounters. Transformation is another common theme. Vampires are often depicted as shapeshifters, able to take on the form of animals or mist. The Asambasam of West Africa has iron teeth and hooks for feet, hanging from trees to catch its prey, while the Lamia of ancient Greece was said to transform into a beautiful woman to lure men to their doom. In Japan, the Rokurokubi appears as a normal person by day, but at night, its neck stretches to impossible lengths to feed on the unsuspecting. Despite these similarities, cultural differences shape the vampire myth in unique ways. In Hindu mythology, the Vedala is a ghostly being that haunts cemeteries and possesses corpses, while the Pisacha, another type of vampire, feeds on the energy of the living and the dead. These creatures are not simply bloodthirsty monsters but also spirits that interact with the physical and spiritual realms in complex ways. In contrast, the vampire in Western folklore is often portrayed as a cursed human, doomed to walk the earth for eternity. This idea is vividly brought to life in the tales of Dracula, where the vampire is both a figure of nobility and horror, a tragic character bound by an unending hunger. The notion of the vampire as a cursed being is less prevalent in other cultures, where they may be seen as more demonic or elemental in nature. The impact of these ancient vampire myths on modern interpretations is profound. The archetype of the vampire has evolved, but its core elements remain intact, resonating with audiences worldwide. The seductive allure of the vampire, combined with its monstrous nature, makes it a compelling figure in contemporary literature and film. Bram Stoker's Dracula took the European vampire myth and transformed it into a story of Gothic horror and tragedy, setting the stage for countless adaptations. This version of the vampire, blending aristocratic charm with deadly danger, influenced many later portrayals. In Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, vampires are not just monsters but complex characters with deep emotions and existential dilemmas, reflecting the Vatala's interaction with both the living and the dead. The seductive vampire also finds its roots in the Lamia and the Greek legends, where beauty and danger are intertwined. This aspect is vividly portrayed in modern vampire romances, where the vampire is often a tragic hero or heroine, capable of love and redemption despite their dark nature. The transformation theme persists as well, seen in stories where vampires change form or struggle with their dual identities, echoing the shape-shifting myths from around the world. The influence of Eastern myths can be seen in the portrayal of vampires as beings that drain life force or energy rather than just blood. This is evident in films and series where vampires possess supernatural abilities and their predation is more metaphysical. The Jiangshi stiff, hopping movements and the draining of chi have inspired characters in various media that mix martial arts and horror. Modern media often blends these ancient elements, creating vampires that are a patchwork of global myths. The result is a rich, multifaceted portrayal that keeps the vampire fresh and intriguing. The fusion of different cultural attributes allows for endless reinterpretations, each one adding a new layer to the vampire legend. What is perhaps most fascinating is how these stories continue to reflect our deepest fears and desires. The vampire, in its many forms, speaks to our fear of death, our longing for immortality, and our fascination with the unknown. It is a mirror to our own humanity, showing us both our darkest impulses and our potential for redemption. In this way, the vampire remains a powerful symbol, its ancient roots feeding into the ever-growing branches of modern storytelling. The common threads and unique variations of vampire myths from around the world create a rich tapestry that continues to captivate and terrify, a testament to the enduring power of these timeless tales. As long as there are stories to be told, the vampire will remain, lurking in the shadows, waiting to emerge into the moonlight once more. In the stillness of the night, when shadows creep and the world falls silent, there is a creature that stirs our deepest fears and curiosities. The vampire, a figure of eternal allure and terror, has been a constant presence in human imagination across centuries and continents. This ancient myth, born from the darkest corners of our collective psyche, has evolved and transformed, yet it remains a haunting reflection of our innermost desires and dreads. From the barren steppes of Eastern Europe to the mystical lands of the Far East, tales of the vampire have emerged, each one a thread in a vast and intricate tapestry. These stories, though varied in their details, share a common essence, an insatiable hunger, a connection to the dead, and a profound influence on the living. They are not merely tales of blood and horror, but profound reflections on life, death, and the unknown. In Eastern European folklore, the vampire is a creature both feared and revered. The Nosferatu and Strigoi, with their bloodthirsty ways and supernatural powers, embody the fears of a people living on the edge of survival. These vampires are not just monsters, they are symbols of death's inevitability and the thin veil separating the living from the dead. The rituals and beliefs surrounding them are a testament to the human need to understand and control the forces that lurk in the darkness. Traveling to Scandinavia, the draugr emerges from ancient Norse mythology. This undead being, fierce and relentless, guards its treasures and haunts the living with a ferocity that speaks to the harsh realities of life in the Viking Age. The draugr's vampiric characteristics, its insatiable hunger for life and its ability to transform, have left a lasting imprint on vampire legends, blending the line between ghost and vampire. In the Celtic lands, the Dullahan and the owl seed bring a different flavor to the vampire myth. The Dullahan, with its terrifying headless form, rides forth as a harbinger of death, while the owl seed, with their otherworldly beauty and danger, reflect the complex relationship between the living and the supernatural. These myths, steeped in the rich folklore of Ireland and Scotland, contribute to the multifaceted nature of vampire lore, adding layers of mystery and enchantment. Medieval literature further solidified the vampire's place in our cultural consciousness. Texts from this era depict vampires as both malevolent and pitiable, creatures trapped in a state of eternal unrest. These depictions influenced the way vampires were perceived and feared, shaping the stories that would be told for generations. The power of the written word, combined with the vivid imaginations of medieval authors, breathed life into the vampire myth, ensuring its survival through the ages. The Renaissance, with its explosion of art and literature, brought new dimensions to the vampire myth. As society changed, so did the vampire, evolving from a grotesque monster into a more complex and sometimes tragic figure. This period saw the vampire becoming a symbol of forbidden desires and hidden fears, a reflection of the human condition in all its beauty and horror. Literature and art of the time depicted vampires as beings of great charisma and danger, capable of eliciting both fear and fascination. The spread of vampire myths through colonization and cultural exchange further enriched the lore. As European settlers encountered indigenous beliefs, the vampire mythos expanded, blending with local legends to create new forms. This blending of cultures gave rise to unique interpretations of the vampire, each one adding to the depth and complexity of the myth. The vampire became a symbol of cultural intersection, embodying the fears and hopes of diverse peoples. In contemporary culture, the vampire has become a ubiquitous figure, present in literature, film, and popular media. From the gothic horror of Bram Stoker's Dracula to the romantic allure of Twilight, the vampire has undergone countless transformations, yet its core remains unchanged. It is a creature of the night, a being of eternal hunger and unending life, reflecting our deepest fears and most forbidden desires. The vampire's enduring appeal lies in its ability to adapt and evolve, mirroring the changing times and societal norms. In modern stories, vampires are often depicted as complex characters, capable of love, sorrow, and redemption. This evolution has allowed the vampire to remain relevant, captivating new generations with its blend of horror and humanity. Throughout the ages, the vampire has been a mirror to our souls, reflecting our darkest fears and deepest longings. It is a testament to the power of myth and the enduring nature of storytelling. As we continue to create and share these tales, the vampire will remain a haunting presence, a reminder of the thin line between life and death, light and darkness. In the end, the vampire is more than just a creature of the night. It is a symbol of the eternal struggle between life and death, a reflection of our own fears and desires. Its story is our story, a tale of survival, transformation, and the unending quest for understanding. As long as there are shadows in the night and mysteries to unravel, the vampire will live on, a timeless figure in the ever-evolving saga of human mythology.